Marty Coleman, episode 3 of the Juice Box Junkies, all the way from Virginia today. I got Brian Dunleavy with me. Brian, how's it going?
It's going. It's going. A little feeling a little Texas weather up here. A little 50 plus degrees over here. I'm liking it.
Hey, we finally made it back to the 70s today, and I got shorts on for the first time in about 10 days. We had snow last Thursday and Friday and Saturday. We're not used to that here, so
Rub it in, man.
keep it. It's like 70 and sunshine here today. Christian Espinoza, all the way out in Seattle, Washington. He graced us this week, and he's actually got a Astros hat on frontwards this week. Christian, what's happening?
I want to make sure everyone knows that I'm actually an Astros fan and I'm from Houston. So, I didn't want there to be any concerns after our episode 1. So
Nice. All right. Well, we got 3 different time zones working here, fellows. We thought we were going to have some more contributors today. It didn't work out. Works out. We'll figure it out either way. But we've got 3 time zones across the country represented on this podcast. And I debated putting the lockout on the agenda because episode 3 this will be the 3rd time we talked about the lockout. We don't have much to talk about. Just that last week the owners offered or suggested that they use the federal mediators, soundly, roundly, and quickly rejected by the players and the union. And really the only other thing that's happened to the lockout that I know of, you guys may know more than me, but the only thing I know of, the players have just been bashing Manfred and MLB on social media. That's the only thing I've really seen in the last week. No real progress. Brian, any progress that you're aware of, or we're still at square? I wouldn't even call it square one, square zero.
I'd say square zero or -1. I think I haven't seen anything really materialize other than some fun tweets and things. I know there's one player that tweeted out the players are holding strong together and they're in this, so I think they're in it for the long haul. For the time being. So that's not a good sign. I was also just reading another player from the Braves pitcher saying, and I know that's a sour topic for the podcast here, but I like what he says. He said, hard to negotiate with the wall. Tyler Matzik. Doesn't matter if you add an outlet to it or not. So, I think that perfectly expresses the feelings, the frustrations that the players have, that they're trying to at least talk about it, and the owners don't seem interested whatsoever in it. And if that's the case, I think our worst fears are going to come true. I think we're going to be in this until, I don't even know, June, maybe longer.
Well, that is incredibly depressing, especially for a podcast that just started. It's on episode 3. Boy, I have impeccable timing of starting a podcast. A couple years ago, it was college football when the pandemic hit, and now it's baseball, MLB, during which looks like a strike or a lockout is looming. Christian, any updates from your end on the lockout? What you're thinking? We were chatting before we hit record, and we were talking about the players standing strong, as Brian said. And one of the things I mentioned was that they're standing strong now. They're listening to paychecks. And I read a couple of weeks ago that the union had a plan to pay them $5,000 a month. Sounds great, sounds great. But if you're used to making 30 or 20 or 15 or 10, heck, even $1 million a year, 5,000 a month isn't going to cut it. You think players continue on this path, Christian, or do you see any hope of any negotiations in the near future?
Yeah, I don't think it is a game of chicken at this point, right? It's who's going to blink first, who wants the money more, the owners or the players. And I don't think from what I've been reading is that from the players' perspective, they're not trying to change anything wildly different in the language that's already presented. They just want some of those numbers and facts and figures to be updated, obviously, with more share the revenue and that type of thing. So I just think it's about money and how long they're going to stick to their guns. I think it's going to become more of a public mudslinging thing before this is said and done. I mean, obviously the mediation was and the players' response to that has been just kind of the start of just finger pointing at this point, especially as fans start to realize, oh, we're not going to get baseball on time, and real baseball might be affected at this point, or is affected at this point. So I think it's it's going to be a total game of chicken. It's going to be public mudslinging a little bit, just on whose fault's what and all that kind of things. But I did see that Lance McCullers Jr. is the Astros players rep, and Jason Castro, I believe, sits on an executive committee for the MLB Players Association. And I think they've been keeping the Astros and players in loop, as much as humanly possible. But it sounds like they're kind of in those two, at least the comments and quotes I've seen, they're in line with what the players have been reported nationally. So our team is specifically is in line with the goal of improving their revenue numbers and sort of those service time manipulation things that we've talked about on previous episodes. So yeah, and I mean, obviously not a lot to talk about, but we have to at least touch on it, with it being such a prominent thing that's affecting the game right now. So
No doubt. And as I mentioned, I was thinking as you were talking there, as I mentioned in the article I wrote about my son and I missing out on baseball this year, potential billionaires arguing with millionaires about who gets what. That's kind of what we're talking about here at this point. Okay, fellas, last week we talked about Trevor Story, and Matt Kunkel, who's not here today, said he wanted to sign Story. Of course, I charged him with doing the college football routine of just signing everybody you can so the other teams wouldn't get him. I think both Brian and I were on the side of not signing Trevor Story, mainly because of the splits. I think he batted 203 away from Coors Field last year, and subsequently, a little research on my end shows he's gotten worse every year on the road. He had some decent years early on in his career in the 260 range, and then it went to 240, and then it went to 220, and last year it was 203, I believe. Downhill away from Coors Field, that scares me. I don't want to pay $20 million for a guy to hit 203 or 210 or whatever. I'd rather take the chance on Jeremy Pena. I think that's what Brian and I agreed on last week. Christian came back with a rebuttal. Now we want to allow him to share his rebuttal live on the podcast, or taped when you see it, but we're live on the podcast. Christian, your take on why the Astros should consider Trevor Story.
Well, first of all, Marty, it's not our money. It's Jim's Crane's money, and he has plenty of it. So write the damn check.
That's number one.
Yeah, that's fine. If we can't get Correa and he's not willing to do the 10-year, $325 million contract, I think Trevor Story at $20 million would be a nice concession. I don't really. I mean, Pena on paper looks great. We've seen him in some of the fall leagues and stuff, and just playing really well. He looks like an MLB player. I mean, the eye test, I don't even need to show me metrics. Like, just watching the guy play, he looks like he's an MLB player. So I think we don't need to sign Story to an enormously long contract. And I don't think it's going to be as lucrative as people think, just because of those reasons you mentioned, right? It's like he's coming off of some injuries last season. His team has just been dismantled around him. So he's just getting less and less protection, less and less quality batters. I mean, Nolan Arenado got traded. I think he's got maybe Ryan McMahon maybe as the only real good solid hitter in that lineup. And Charlie Blackmon's long kind of, past his prime a little bit, not long past his prime, but just past his prime, and not quite the hitter he was, at this prime of his career. And so I think you're just starting to see some of those things of a bad team, a player that just needs a change of scenery. I think the things that encourage me the most is his power is real. Like, he doesn't need altitude to drive the ball. I think I lived in Colorado, lived in Denver before I lived in Seattle, and I spent a lot of time watching those games. And I think it as much as it behooves players to be able to hit the ball a little bit further with the altitude, it also helps pitchers, a little bit as well in terms of moving the ball around and those types of things. And so I think it's maybe a little bit of a wash just because of the power he's shown. He has the ability to If you look at his hit charts, he can move the ball around the field, but generally his power is enough that it would be just a perfect Crawford box home run. And so, I don't, like I said, I don't think you sign him for, Corey Seager, Carlos Correa money, even if it's a shorter contract. I don't see paying him more than, maybe 22 million a year or something like that. But, a nice number would be around 20 million. Strong defender, not a great defender in some metrics. Some metrics, he's in the top percentile, with ultimate zone rating and defensive run saved. He's in the top 20 defenders in the league, but then, you look at outs above average and think some of those numbers, and he's in the 4th percentile, which is, and we know that all these metrics are kind of finicky. Carlos Correa and Nolan Arenado, our 2 platinum glovers last season, weren't even in the top 10 in OAA. So I try to take things with a grain of salt, but I just look at it as what's our best options, right? So, if we have to roll with Chaz McCormick and eventually Jake Meyers as a platoon again this season, and Jeremy Pena, I don't believe that's the best team we can put on the field if we just hold steady. I know that especially if we're losing Correa, because that is like a consistent, 278 who his road splits are mirrored, and he is a really good hitter on the road and at home. And we're losing a lot more offense than people realize. I know he had a bad slump this last season in the middle of the summer, but he really came through in the playoffs and towards the end of the season. So we're going to lose a lot of more offense there than people realize. And so I think if we are a championship team, and if we were a team trying to just make it to the playoffs and win some games in the playoffs, I think this would be fine to run with Jeremy Pena at shortstop and Chaz McCormick, and then eventually Jake Meyers at center field. But I just don't think long term that's the right thing to do. That short term, I just don't think that's the right thing to do. Long term, it could be Jeremy Pena could be great. He could be perfect. He could be everything that Carlos Correa is taking with him. But I think Trevor Story inserted into this lineup, he did come out. An article did come out today from I believe out of the Denver Post. He was quoted as saying he wasn't interested in changing positions. So I know Brian and I joked like, okay, we'll make a concession, we'll move him to center field, but it doesn't sound like Trevor Story wants that. So I think if we did sign him, he would be put at shortstop. I don't know. I don't really know what the Astros. They may feel confident with what they have on paper, but I would feel a little better knowing we have a potential 30-30 guy inserted into the lineup.
Yeah, I think you mentioned some of the things we talked about last week. You must have listened to the podcast. Brian talked about maybe his power, some of those home runs that he's hitting in Colorado would fall short in Houston. Short of the Crawford boxes or off the wall, or 3 or 4 feet here or there or whatever. The difference in Colorado could make a difference in home runs. But you also brought up a really good point, is that the projections I've seen for Pena have him around 10 or 11 home runs, have him around 240. Now, I think you're talking about a massive, huge fall off from Carlos Correa if Jeremy Pena has the expected season that the projections are showing. Okay, Brian, you have a chance for rebuttal to Christian's rebuttal on Trevor Story.
Well, I think there's a lot of good points that Christian makes, and especially in the short term. If he was signed for a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal, it might not be the worst thing in the world if we don't re-sign Correa. But with that said, you look at his splits and history, especially his power numbers. Christian mentioned that. I just went back a couple of years, especially his 30-plus home run years, and he only had 11 of those away from Coors and had well into the 20s at home. So, are his power numbers inflated because he's at Coors? I think so. I think maybe he tops out at around 20 home runs, maybe 2 or 3 plus around there. And so my question is that, along with a low batting average percentage, worth it compared to having a rookie, maybe platoon in there with some others whether we keep Diaz and platoon him with the rookie, or what I suggested, maybe you do sign Story for a year, cut or trade Diaz, and then you bring up Pena to be that utility guy and get him some experience in that utility, just playing and filling in on people's off days and different things, and you still get some production out of him and some introduction to the big leagues. And while we were talking here, unfortunately, the more we talk about it, the more y'all make me think about all these things and the other questions that we could bring up that you could throw into the mix as well. If you want to get some other options or look at some other options, there's lots of people that are unsigned right now that didn't quite make it to the lockout pre-signing. And I know a lot of them probably have predetermined locations or places they're going to go, but could you, and I know this has been bounced around, could you see moving Alex Bregman over to short and signing a premier third baseman with that money that you got left over? And then you're really talking about replacing those power numbers, because power numbers at third base are a lot easier to come by than they are at shortstop. And so if you get, a free agent third baseman that can get you 20, 25 jacks with 80 RBIs, just like Correa produced this year, you're not losing too much. You get that position, and then at the same time, you can still bring up, the rookie and get him experience and get him, some time where it needs to be, and decide maybe we keep it that way, or maybe we move Bregman back to third and go from there. And if Payne is really producing and showing out while he's up for, that utility man, that fill-in role. But especially looking at that, you could really sign a top-tier guy for a 1 or 2 year contract, just like they did with Verlander for third base, and again, try and extend the push towards the series title another year.
One more year. Christian, any final words on Story, or did you say it all on the first go round?
No, I'm good. I don't want to beat that dead horse, but I do like the idea of the moving Alex potentially to shortstop. I know that's something big league clubs don't really like to do too much, is moving guys around like that, especially kind of superstar players like Bregman is, and he's coming off of a wrist surgery and all these things, so it may not be the right time to ask him to do all that extra work in addition to some of the rehabilitation and things he's been dealing with. But I think in theory, there's a plenty of nice third basemen out there that, I mean, I was adamant about adding Chris Bryant at the trade deadline last season, and I think insert him into that lineup. He's like the prototypical Astro, at least offensively. And obviously he's a pretty strong and versatile defender, can play corner, outfield, and third base. And so, something like that I would be really interested in. But I don't know that the big league club would, especially Crane, would really feel good about. And we don't know what Alex wants to do, but I think he's got enough swagger. If anyone asked him, he'd probably like, hell yeah, I'll go back and play shortstop. I'll do whatever it takes. So, so if anyone was going to do it, it'd be him for sure.
Well, and he also too, I think he, looking at shortstop, I mean, could be an option. I don't think it would be. I agree with you, Christian. If we were starting in March right away, I don't think it would be an option. I don't think he could play a full season, full right after all this stuff and go right in there and jump in. And I don't know if he wants that either, because that's a great question too. But if we don't start playing until June or July, he's got a lot more rehab time, a lot more time to get ready for that potential, especially if ownership has a privy conversation with them saying, hey, this is what we're looking at. Maybe you want to train for both.
Interesting. So this is going to be a great topic for podcast, especially if one of these comes up and one of these scenarios actually happens during the season, or there's more discussion about this as a potential option. Everything hasn't been that. It's been, they need a shortstop, and it looks like it's going to be Pena. That's pretty much what I've seen, at least that I've read. So, all right, this week's minor leaguer, we were going to start out talk about Corey Lee, but over the weekend, my son had the brilliant idea of talking about Matthew Barefoot. Now, I have no idea why he picked Matthew Barefoot out as all of the minor leaguers to talk about, but I reached out to Matthew Barefoot on Twitter, and he was kind enough to respond and provide some information, which you two guys are more ready to talk about than I will ever be, changing his batting stance. Anyway, he was a 6th-round draft pick in 2018 out of Campbell University in North Carolina. Started out with Tri-City in the New York Penn League, I believe. Had a horrible season, batted 155. Now, realize he had an open stance in college, and, college is one thing, as you guys know, but he was a little overwhelmed that first year and batted 155. I think he only had one extra base hit in 71 at-bats. So not a good year. But during this time, he's working with Astros minor league hitting instructor Sean Godfrey, changed his stance. He knew he needed to change his stance. And let me see. I wanted to tell you what he told me. But basically, horrible podcasting here. The MLB.com profile on Barefoot said his swing had a lot of movement and effort, and it was an unorthodox swing. His goal was to make the swing more efficient, and he collaborated with Godfrey to keep his load simple. There you go, which he said would translate to easy power. Ended up at 3 levels last year, hitting 20 home runs, finishing up at Corpus, where he struggled, batting only 175 at Corpus from August on. But he said he's worked in the offseason. He has a plan moving forward. Almost the exact same measurables as Chaz. I mean, they're the same height, at least listed, and 3 pounds each other. He's a speedster. 21 out of 25 stolen bases, 21 for 25 in those stolen bases last year across those 3 levels. And here's the thing I found out doing research. This is why I love it. My man had a 94-mile-an-hour fastball in college, but he did not want to pitch. He didn't want to pitch. He told me his goal is to prove that he can play center field, and he wants to do that this year. He told me he wanted to improve his arm, and I'm like, well, you throw 94. What are you looking for? I mean, I think one of the problems he had was accuracy as a pitcher. But anyway, needless to say, he's at Corpus. He didn't tell me where he hoped to start the season, but I'm assuming it's going to be Corpus in Double-A. A big year for Barefoot. As I said, he only hit 175 at Corpus last year while he was there, 137 bats. So if he's going to continue to progress to the show, he needs to have a bigger year this year. Brian, do you know anything about Barefoot? Have you seen any of and the video in there of a 510-foot home run, by the way, at least allegedly a 510-foot home run. Brian, do you know anything about Matthew Barefoot? Have you seen any information on him or seen any film?
No, I haven't seen any film on him. I mean, I was just looking over his stats when we were going to be talking about it today, just like you had mentioned. Looking at his stats at the different levels, low A, high A, he seemed to do pretty well, pretty solid overall. And then, looks like once he got to Double-A, it took a little dip down, and that could be the same thing that happened with the first year right out of the box. That he, it takes a little time to get adjusted to maybe the speed of the game, maybe the movement on the pitches and that sort of thing, or maybe just a confidence boost. It's tough going from team to team and moving from different guys, different coaching, and different spots in the lineup. You're going to see a lot different pitches, a lot different approaches to you as a hitter that you might not have seen if you were the top guy, that leadoff man or number 2 hole. That could be part of his issue and his adjustment. I do like the fact that he is open to that coaching, especially from the coaching standpoint, from hitting, especially when you get to that major league level, and I'm sure he saw a handful of decent arms, playing at Campbell. Campbell's a Division I school, and so he saw pretty good talent, I'm sure, there in North Carolina. There's lots of great players that come out of there. But shortening your load and getting to where you're supposed to be sooner rather than later seems to be that same thing I was talking about is adjusting to the speed, going from an open stance. And really it's timing, and it's hard for guys to, if they don't have super quick hands to get to that spot and get to that, ready hitting position in time and close off and get ready to attack the ball. If they can't do that consistently, and it's a little tougher to adjust, especially to the off-speed pitches, than staying straight, staying short is definitely the best solution. Use the power of the pitcher's speed, against them to get those power numbers up. And I'm sure, working with that in his swing track and everything, it probably got him just to where he wants to be. So I think for him, it's only time to adjust to the new speed, the new pitching level, and keep going from there. He might have the same scenario this year. He starts out in AA, finishes in AAA, and then the same thing repeats the next year. Starts out in AAA, maybe makes up to the club in August of 23. You don't know. As far as all those things, looking stats wise and numbers and measurables, I mean, it seems like, and this comes back to the big question, and this is not for me to answer. This is for Crane, and this is for Click, and if Dusty Baker's still the manager, that's for them to answer. Is that the kind of player they want on the club for center field? Because there's huge differences in philosophy. Do you want a speed guy, a power guy, a consistent average guy, or do you want a guy that just, for the most part hits for power and is a numbers guy? And from what I see and I've heard from Baker, I know he's an old school guy. He wants the fast guys that have the high average, and power numbers are a bonus. So if Baker's still there, Barefoot's, if he can get his stolen bases up, consistently, then he might be the guy. But if Baker's not there, then who knows what direction they may go in.
Yeah, he readily admitted, Matthew admitted that he had an issue with his swing last August. He said in the later part of the year, and I'm assuming that means when he hit 175 at Corpus. So he believes he's ironed that out. So we'll see what that means this year. Christian, your take on Matthew Barefoot as a prospect?
I am. This will show you the level of nerd I am, but I'm in a 50 person roster fantasy dynasty keeper league, baseball league, and so I do a lot of research on minor leaguers for that purpose, and watch a lot of videos, especially with the Astros. Obviously, they're the team I follow, and so I have done a little. I did a little, I guess, my own level of scouting, which isn't pro level by any stretch, but to say his swing was unorthodox, I mean, he had his hands really high, he had a crazy toe tap, and somehow compressed his body when he was hitting the ball, and I think that really was really hurting his swing. And so he indicated he worked that out. One of the things I think I didn't really, I keep forgetting to factor into a lot of these conversations when we have about our prospects, especially right now, is that they missed all of 2020. Like, they didn't play baseball at all, like all these guys. And so, and for a guy like Barefoot, who is coming out of Campbell, not a top tier prospect, I think he has a plus hitting tool, and that's about it. Everything else is kind of hit or miss. He needs all the development that he can get and all the time. And so I think that kind of probably hurt him a little bit. I know I read an article written by Chandler Rome where Barefoot indicated that he bought set up an indoor batting cage and a TrackMan and all that stuff to like really hone in his swing. And I think we saw some of that in 2021 where he was working with coaches, putting the time in on his own. And we saw some real improvement. I mean, he was hitting well over 300 in low A, and just, I think he maybe probably got into a little bit of a slump there when he got to Corpus, but he's got those tools. Like he as far as like the running and the throwing, I think from what I understand is, he plays a decent center fielder. He could make some better reads and maybe some game situational type things that he can work on. But those are things that he kind of lost during that pandemic year. So we just have to like, okay, he's still young. He's still going to have time to play Corpus next season, maybe another full season there. I don't really see any path for him to be in the big leagues at this point, right this minute. But he is, like Marty said, he is a 6 foot, 200 pound prototypical Astros center fielder. He fits that Jake Meyers. Well, Jake Meyers is a little bigger, but Chas McCormick kind of mold. And so I'm excited to see how he will progress. I mean, he never hit under 300 at Campbell. Like Brian said, that's a really good school that plays a lot of good teams, and so there's something to that. It's not a fluke, and I think he's coming into the season probably ranked as in our top 15 maybe prospects of our system. So we don't have the best system in the league, but I think we do have some of the best coaches down there and amongst our minor league squads that really hone in and develop guys and break things down and simplify it for them. I mean, we see that with Miles and Toro and some of these guys who weren't, Baseball America's, or Baseball Prospectus top 100 guys, so we're seeing production and it's not grim to know that we have one, quote unquote, one of the worst farm systems in the league when we have guys like Barefoot who are putting in the work to actually develop and to take the next step. So yeah, excited to see what comes from him. It's hard to deny, the season he had last season. Obviously he struggled a little bit at Corpus, average wise, and just really I didn't watch a ton of those games. I did see some of them, and from what I could see, it was just he looked a little bit lost in his swing, but that's stuff that can be worked out real easily. So
yeah, he was 344 at low A, and I think 287 at high A, and then dropped down to 175 at Corpus. So some adjustments there, and as Brian said, he spent the whole summer moving from place to place to place, team to team to team, and league to league to league. I don't think we have time for another topic, but I wanted to continue something for a couple of minutes that you guys were talking about, especially Brian. You were talking about the philosophy on the center fielder. I'm the one who wrote the article last year that said we needed somebody else besides Straw. It wasn't just because of his power, or lack thereof. That was one of them, and probably one of the major ones. But I just didn't think he added a lot of value. I didn't see that he was the greatest defender that he was being made out to be. Now, he was very good defender. I'm not taking that away from him, but we've seen that Chas, can play center field. I think Chas is more valuable. He can play all three outfield positions. Jake Meyers is an excellent center fielder. So they have two. We talked about a not the deepest farm system in the world. There's been some talk about trading Meyers or Chas, and most of the time it ends up being Chas because people in general, I believe, see Jake as the future center fielder. To me, Chas is ultimately incredibly valuable. He's played, I think, over 200 innings at all three outfield positions, and he plays them all well. He's kind of like the Aledmus Diaz of the outfield. A little bit concerned about his drop-off in power in the second half of last season. I think he had 10 home runs before the All-Star break, only 4 after, and his slugging percentage went way down. So just a kind of a quick thing here at the end. Jake Meyers as your center fielder, Chas as a utility outfielder. Is that what we're seeing in the future? Karnak there, Mr. Brian Dunleavy in Virginia. Is that how you see it playing out, or do you see Chas getting traded and maybe Barefoot coming up to be the replacement? Barefoot also played all three outfield positions so far as a minor leaguer, by the way.
Yeah, I think the biggest question is going to be how long Jake Meyers is out and if he's ready to go at the start of the season. So if that's the case, let's say, just quick theory-wise, if we start in June and Jake Meyers is ready to go day one and can suit up and play center field, I think Jake Meyers is your guy. I don't think there's a question about that because he did not have the dip. He did not have the power surge, if you will, in the season. Now, he didn't play as long either. So
Right.
So that could be a question. I think you keep both of them. I honestly do, unless you have such huge trade potential and value for one of them that you're getting an offer for something that you to reference The Godfather, can't refuse, there's no other way to look at it. You got to keep both of them. And I'll bring up this point in particular, and this is my idea and thought why Uncle Mike is just getting older. And I love Brantley. He's the consummate professional. He's fantastic at the plate. He's an average guy, and I think that's especially why he's on the Astros too. And Dusty Baker really likes him because he is an average guy. With that, how long is Uncle Mike going to last, and how many years does he have left? I think looking long term, you got to look at who do the Astros want to keep in the outfield. I mean, they're going to have Uncle Mike this year, sure, and probably Jake Meyers and McCormick splitting and Kyle Tucker. But then next year, the year after that, what happens? Brantley could be moving on, could be retiring any time now, and you want somebody in his place. And I think McCormick is a great platoon guy to be in, just like I'm saying for Pena, putting them in on guys' days off. I would put McCormick in any of those three positions on their day off. If those guys, spread them out, get McCormick at the ABs, get Meyers obviously in the starting role, and him get the ABs, and if they fluctuate either of them, you can sub one out for the other, no problem. The biggest issue and the biggest thing that needs to be addressed for Meyers is long-term durability. Does he have it? Can he keep up the production throughout the whole season, especially a long season? And the big question McCormick has to answer for this year is, contact. He, lost that power in the second half of the season, and also his strikeouts went way up at the same time. And I think pitchers kind of figured out, and scouting reports figured out how to solve him a little bit. And so, can he adjust to that? Can he adjust to what other teams are going to do and be productive and ultimately not just contact and have a little bit of higher average will go a long way for him. But I definitely see Meyers as the number one guy, and McCormick in there number two as the utility guy, and maybe Barefoot in a couple years is that utility guy, the same as McCormick would be this coming season.
Here's the thing, Chaz. I did a little research on Chaz, and he had 20 home runs in 968 minor league at bats, and he had 10 in his first 130 something, I think, at bats before the All-Star game last week. So just came out of nowhere, right? I mean, and he ended up with 14, but I think he only, as I mentioned, he only had 4 in the next 160 or 70 at bats in the second half. So will it come back? Who knows? Christian, you get the final word on this topic. Center field, Jake Meyers, Chaz McCormick, some combination, or we're forgetting about Jose Siri.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. And so the fun thing about this is that I think we talk a lot about Story, or we have talked a lot about Story so far with our podcast, but I think that's the only legitimate free agent that we're going to look at this point. I think if we're not going to have any more conversations. But if you look at center fielders free agent wise, I mean, unless we're bringing back like Jake Marisnick or something like that, who is a free agent, or we go outside for a corner outfielder. I wrote an article about, maybe just like a fantasy wish list kind of free agent. Like, let's go get Seiya Suzuki from Japan, put him in right field and move Chris Bryant to center field. And I was like, that would be perfect, especially with Pena playing center field. But I just don't think those are really logical things that's going to happen, especially with the lockout the way it is and stuff. And so I think we hold pat with what we have. I mean, I think you can keep Siri on the roster. Siri can be packaged with Jake Odorizzi, or any combination of those guys could be packaged with Odorizzi for some bullpen piece that we're going to need inevitably need at the middle of the season. Because we always need bullpen help. Every team always does. And, and so one of those guys, unfortunately, is going to be the odd man out this season about on whatever trade deadline ends up being in August or September, or looking at this point, October. But I don't know. I'm just kidding. But so I think it's going to be I think it's going to be obviously not Marisnick, McCormick's job to lose for now, just because Meyers is still getting healthy. But one of the things I really liked about Meyers is in the playoffs, like how much of a spark plug he was. Like, the guy's a gamer. Like, Jake Meyers is a gamer. I did a deep dive on him on a past article on Climbing Taos Hill, And he's always been like a gamer like that, just a big time guy. He played at Nebraska. Just always been that kind of a big time guy, and wants to show off, and not show off, but like show out and really do some special things and be a spark plug. And so I liked a lot of those things I saw in the playoffs. Those are the kinds of things that energize me. When we talk about Correa, like, yes, he has his his value as a regular season guy, but all of why the Astros are great is the things they do in the postseason. And when I see what Jake Meyers did in his before he got hurt, I thought it was very encouraging. And so some of those things that is for the next season, I think it's going to be Jake Meyers' job once he's back and kind of healthy and in the swing of it. But McCormick's not. That's to say they're almost a wash. I mean, we debated this all season on our team Slack, where we all like it's almost interchangeable. Really, it's just a matter of who matches up better. We have a team that has enough data and analytics that Dusty's going to be able to make the decision of who's the best person for the best matchup. And I think we can play it like that and be okay. And then we always have Siri, to be a spark plug to come in. And, obviously he has massive power, but he also has some, he's not quite the hitter that the other two are in terms of average contact and those types of things. And so love seeing Siri play. I love the swagger, but I don't see him as like an everyday guy. As far as potential center field, I mean, if both guys struggle or maybe Jake Meyers doesn't even come back by the midpoint and we see McCormick and Siri struggle, I don't know that we go out and trade for anybody either. And, I was really high on Brian Reynolds, but Pirates seem pretty adamant that they don't want to trade him. Baltimore's already said they want to trade Cedric Mullins, but I just don't think we have enough to give up to get him. We would have to give up one of our young pitchers like Luis or Fromber or something, and I just don't think the Astros want to do that. Pitching is pretty valuable for us right now. And so, I think we're going to roll with McCormick, and I think that's just the most logical thing right now. And then I think when Meyers comes back, if he's healthy and can be productive, I think he's the guy personally. But and then I think one of those three are going to be gone at the trade deadline this season if we have a season.
Okay, I said I'd give you the last word, but I'm going to get the last word in here because I'm controlling this show. Jose Siri scares me. Right? How many almost collisions did they have last year in the little bit that he played? No, I agree with you. He adds a lot of zest, zip, energy, everything. And when he connects, the ball takes off. But, man, he scares me in the field. I thought it was going to hurt Kyle Tucker there for a minute. I was going to have to fight him with that. And one option you didn't mention, and we don't have time to talk about today, we'll talk about next time, Kyle Tucker moving to center field and somebody in right? That's another option that has been talked about. I'm not for that. We'll talk about it next time. Christian Espinosa from Seattle, Brian Dunleavy from Virginia. Fellas, I appreciate it. Ran along today, but it's always fun talking the Astros. Next week.
All right. Take care, fellas.
See y'all.